Ever wonder how ancient civilizations navigated without GPS? Imagine a world where the night sky was the only compass, where a single line scratched into clay could guide an entire village, and where every map, no matter how simple, carried the wonder of discovery. Tonight, we unfold the forgotten art of ancient cartography. A journey through time that begins with cave walls and ends with the birth of the first great maps. A quiet adventure, perfect for guiding you gently toward sleep. Welcome, dear traveler, and thank you for joining us once again on Go to Sleep Historian, where stories of the past are told softly, slowly, and with enough calm to ease even the heaviest mind into rest. If you have been with us before, thank you for returning to wander through history with us. Your presence, night after night, keeps this peaceful little corner of the world alive. And if this is your first visit to our channel, welcome to the firelight. Here, we tell history in two gentle parts. First, a quiet, spoken story, and then one full hour of relaxing sleep music to help you drift into deep, easy rest. If tonight's journey brings you peace, please consider subscribing, leaving a calm comment, or sharing this video with another traveler who may need rest. Your support helps these stories continue across many nights to come. Tonight, we travel far back into the dawn of knowledge, to the people who first dared to draw the world, from the earliest cave markings, to the clay tablets of Babylon, to the sacred maps of Egypt, the visions of the Greeks, and the roads of mighty Rome. We follow the long, quiet evolution of maps, how humanity learned to chart the land, the sea, and even the sky above. And when our tale comes to its gentle end, let the final hour of calm, ambient music carry you the rest of the way into sleep. No interruptions, no more rewards, just soft sound and deep rest. So now, settle in, slow your breath, and allow the firelight to fade as we begin. This is the art of ancient cartography, and our journey starts in the darkness of a cave, where the very first lines of the world were drawn. There was a time, long before kingdoms rose and scholars spoke of the world as a sphere, when the human hand first tried to make sense of the unknown. Deep within the shelter of caves, where flickering firelight chased shadows across uneven walls, our ancestors made their first marks. These were not yet letters, nor symbols of power or prayer. There was something simpler, more instinctive, a quiet attempt to remember a path, to mark a hunting trail, or perhaps to tell another where safety could be found. Imagine the world as it was then. The air cold and sharp, the nights longer than comfort allowed. A small group of early humans huddled by a fire. One among them, perhaps the keenest observer of the stars, or the wanderer who walked furthest from camp, reached for a fragment of charcoal. On the rough wall, beneath the light of a wavering flame, they drew lines. Perhaps they showed a river bend, a hill that rose like a dark tooth on the horizon, or the path of herds they followed each season. Whatever it was a beginning. A moment when memory took shape. Outside the mind, across the world, in scattered caves from France to Indonesia, remnants of these ancient markings remain. They are maps of sorts, though not in the way we think of them now. Some show clusters of dots that might have been stars or settlements. Others trace the outlines of rivers, coastlines, or hunting grounds. The makers likely never thought of them as art or science. They were practical, born of survival. Yet, unknowingly, they laid the first stones on the long road toward cartography, the art of depicting space and understanding place. As centuries turned to millennia, these marks grew more deliberate. The human mind, restless and curious, sought to organize the vastness around it. Hunters and gatherers began to remember distances, the time it took to walk from one valley to another, the angle of the sun at different points in their journey. They began, in their own simple way, to think in terms of direction. In these early moments, the notion of a map began to stir, not as parchment or ink, but as thought. Among the oldest known examples stands a curious find from the ruins of Candlelight in modern-day Turkey. Dated to Harun 6200 BCE, archaeologists uncovered a wall painting showing what many believed to be a plan of the settlement itself, a collection of houses, drawn in rough rectangles, and in the background a large shape that may depict a nearby volcanic mountain. Whether this truly was a map or a ritual painting remains debated, but its message echoes the same human impulse: to make sense of where one stands in the world. It is a bridge between memory and landscape. To imagine the life of these early map makers is to step into their silence. There was no written language yet, no mathematics to measure distance, and no compass to guide a hand. There was only experience, the rise of the sun, the pool of the river, the outline of a mountain that marked the edge of a known land. When they captured not only geography, but feeling. Their lines held the warmth of familiarity and the unease of the unknown. In these dark chambers, map and myth were not separate. The world beyond one's sight was not just uncharted, it was alive. Every river had a spirit, every hill a guardian. The act of drawing the land was also an act of acknowledging its power. When they marked the walls, perhaps they believed they were tracing not only paths of travel but paths of meaning, ways through both earth and mystery. As communities grew and spread, these early ways of representing space began to change. Hunters became farmers, settlements became villages, and the knowledge of place became more permanent. Paths were no longer just walked. They were recorded in the mind and sometimes in symbol. A stick scratched into clay, a line drawn in sand, a carving upon a bone. All were small maps, each telling someone, here you are, and there lies your way. Over time, memory itself could no longer hold all that was known. Distance increased. Trade routes formed between valleys and over mountains. People began to move farther than their ancestors ever had, and so they need to record, to remember, and to teach others grew. What began as simple markings in darkness became something greater, a shared memory, a collective understanding of the world. We do not know the names of those who made these first maps. Their work lies silent beneath centuries of dust, their intentions guessed at by those who came long after. Yet, in every map that followed on every parchment, papyrus and polished stone, echoes their first attempt. They were the first to say, "This is where I am." And that, in its quiet way, was a miracle. When one studies these ancient lines today, whether carved into stone or painted upon the rough surface of a cave, there is a sense of peace in them. They remind us that long before the noise of modern life, humanity was guided by something profoundly simple, the wish to belong somewhere and to know how to return there again. Every dot, every curve, every uncertain mark carried that same meaning. It was not only the geography of land they mapped, but the geography of hope. And so, as the firelight fades in that ancient cave, imagine the first cartographer setting aside his tool, satisfied that his message will remain. Outside, the wind sighs over the open plains. Stars drift slowly across the sky, and for the first time in history, the world has been drawn. The lines are rough and uncertain, but they are enough, for in them lies direction, and in direction there is comfort. As centuries passed and the old fires burned out, the marks left by humankind grew in number and meaning. What began as simple lines on stone transformed into something far more deliberate. Humanity was learning not only to survive, but to observe. The act of walking the earth, once guided by instinct, became guided by memory, and memory sought a form to endure beyond the fleeting breath of a single life. Thus began the true birth of direction. When the first farmers settled near rivers and fertile plains, they needed to know the shape of their land, the rise of the Nile, the winding of the Tigris and Euphrates, the slopes that caught rain or shadow. All these mattered to those whose lives depended on soil and season. They began to draw with purpose, not to decorate, nor to dream, but to understand and to share. The earliest map makers were not scholars, but practical minds, who needed to remember where the world offered life and where it withheld it. Over time, these simple sketches evolved from personal memory to shared communication. Marks on clay or bark told others where to plant, where water could be found, and where danger lurked. The lines became symbols. The symbols became meaning. A circle might represent a settlement, a wave, a river, across the place where paths met. These were the first true maps, humble, yet powerful. They spoke a language that required no words, only recognition. Archaeologists often speak of a remarkable find at Candlelight, a Neolithic town that flourished more than 8,000 years ago. On the plaster wall of a dwelling, a pattern of squares and shapes spreads outward like a woven mat. Behind it, a larger, jagged form raises. Perhaps a mountain, perhaps a volcano. Many believe it to be one of humanity's first known maps, a view of a settlement with its landmark beyond. Whether it was meant as a chart or as a ritual image, its intent remains wrapped in mystery. Yet to look upon it is to feel a quiet awe, for there lies the mind of someone who thought in terms of place. That is the difference between mark and map. The moment when thought turns outward, when memory becomes message. The one who drew that image may have wished to teach, to remind, or perhaps to guide others through a land that was becoming home. With every line, the world grew smaller. More familiar, it was no longer endless wilderness. It was a place that could be known. As villages turned to towns, and people began to travel farther than their ancestors ever dared, new problems arose. How could one explain a distant land to those who had never seen it? How could traders describe the route to foreign markets or travelers recall their journeys without wandering astray? The answer, once again, was found in drawing, in capturing space with symbol and story. Clay tablets and carved stones became the memory of nations. Imagine a group of traders resting at dusk beside their beasts of burden. The sun sinks low. The day's dust still clings to their robes. One of them reaches into a pack and draws out a clay slab. With the point of a stick, he scratches lines across its surface. A river winding here. A city marked there. His companions nod, understanding. They trace with their fingers the path they will take come morning. It is a quiet moment, but a profound one. For the first time, they are following not the stars, nor the path beneath their feet, but a man-made reflection of the world. This shift from natural guidance to recorded guidance changed everything. The stars, the wind, and the sun still mattered, but the map began to speak alongside them. A new form of trust was born. Faith in the image. Faith in the hand that drew it. The world became something that could be learned, carried, and shared. In this way, the art of mapping was also the art of teaching. And with it came imagination. The mind that drew began to dream beyond the scene. If the river flowed past the horizon, where did it lead? If mountains stood in the distance, what lay beyond their peaks? In drawing what they knew, early mapmakers began to picture what they did not, and so, speculation gave birth to exploration. Curiosity was now tied to ink, clay, and line. There is a deep calm in this idea that humanity's first maps were not driven by conquest or curiosity alone, but by care. They were guides for others, gifts of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. To map was to provide safety, to help others find their way home. In those earliest societies, the cartographer was not a distant scholar. He was a caretaker of memory. Over the centuries, these humble drawings became part of every growing culture. Hunters, sailors, shepherds, and builders all contributed to this quiet revolution. Some etched the flow of rivers onto bone. Others carved the shapes of islands upon driftwood. In their own ways, they were recording not only the lay of the land, but the rhythm of their lives. Each map carried the pulse of a people where they walked, what they saw and what they feared. The dawn of direction was also the dawn of imagination's order. Once humans began to think of the world as something that could be drawn, they also began to believe it could be measured and known. The unknown no longer stretched endlessly beyond them. It became a challenge, waiting to be understood. That first step, taken quietly thousands of years ago, would one day lead to the grand maps of empires, the celestial charts of scholars, and the modern world's endless pursuit of precision. But in the beginning, it was simply just a line scratched into clay. And the thought, here is where I am, and there is where I must go. Even now, when we unfold a map, digital or paper, we echo that ancient moment. We trace our fingers along paths and rivers drawn by unseen hands, trusting them to lead us true. We follow symbols crafted long before our time, shaped by minds that once sat beneath the same stars. In that quiet connection, the first map maker still speaks. And so, the story of cartography truly begins, not with scholars or empires, but with simple marks made by ordinary hands. From the first flick of charcoal on a cave wall to the lines pressed into soft clay beside a river bank, direction was born. It was the moment when humanity learned not only to see the world, but to place itself within it. As the ages turned and humanity gathered into cities, the art of mapping took its first great leap forward. The river valleys of Mesopotamia, the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, became the cradle of recorded direction. Here, in the warmth of the sun-baked plains, the Babylonians began to shape clay not only into bricks and vessels, but into records of the world itself. These were not the uncertain markings of wandering hunters, but the work of scribes, men who gave memory form and gave form the weight of permanence. In those early cities, Uruk, Babylon, and Nippur, the act of writing was sacred. Clay tablets served as both page and archive, preserving knowledge for the gods and for those who governed in their name. And among the thousands of tablets that have survived, a few bear something more than words. They bear the world. With red stylus pressed into wet clay, the first known cartographers etched rivers, mountains, and borders. Their work was steady, purposeful, and imbued with the quiet confidence of a civilization that believed order could be drawn. One such artifact, now known as the Babylonian world map, offers a glimpse into their way of seeing. A small clay tablet, little larger than a man's hand, yet it holds an entire universe. At its center lies Babylon, the heart of their world, drawn as a circle and surrounded by a ring of water. The cosmic ocean they believed encircled all things. Radiating outward are lines marking distant lands, each annotated with cuneiform script. The places of Assyria, Urartu, and Elam. Beyond these, triangular forms represent the mysterious regions of beyond, where creatures and gods were said to dwell. To the modern eye, this map may appear simple, even crude, but to its makers, it was both truth and faith, a mirror of their world as they understood it. It was not meant for navigation, but for comprehension. It showed not distance, but meaning. The map was a reflection of belief as much as of geography. The Babylonians were careful observers of both the earth and the sky. Their priests and scholars studied the heavens, night after night, tracking the paths of stars and planets, noting their influence upon the fate of kingdoms. The clay tablets of their astronomers are among the earliest scientific records ever known, filled with measurements and patterns that later civilizations would inherit. In their eyes, the sky was a map, as real as any drawn upon the ground. Above and below, or the Ragned. If one only knew how to read it, there's something deeply peaceful in the way they saw the world. Where others saw chaos, they saw a design. The rivers that flooded and receded each year were not unpredictable forces, but threads in a divine pattern. The city walls and temples stood not as random works of men, but as points upon a sacred grid. Mapping, in this age, was not merely practical. It was a form of reverence. To draw the world was to acknowledge the god's creation, to participate in its structure. In the cool chambers of Babylonian scribal schools, young apprentices learned to press their styluses into clay with patience and precision. Each wedge-shaped symbol carried both sound and sense. When they drew maps, they did so slowly, letting the lines settle into place as though revealing something already known. Waiting within the clay itself, one might imagine the quiet of those rooms. It's a soft scrape of stylus, the hush of concentration, the distant murmur of life beyond the walls. It was there, in that silence, that cartography began to breathe. Not all Babylonian maps were cosmic. Some served immediate and earthly needs. Land surveys were drawn to resolve disputes over fields or irrigation channels. Records were kept of temple estates and canals, their paths etched carefully to ensure fairness and tribute. These were the first maps of administration, tools of a society learning to manage both land and law. They were simple in appearance, but vast in implication, showing humanity's growing power to measure and to own. Imagine, for a moment, a Babylonian surveyor standing beneath the open sky. The air is thick with the scent of the river. His sandals sink into soft soil as he walks along a boundary marked by stones. Behind him, An assistant carries the tablet upon which each measurement is recorded. Together, they translate the living earth into symbol, the wild into the ordered. For every boundary drawn, a fragment of chaos is tamed. It is a quiet revolution, one of thought, not of sword. The Babylonians' understanding of space was deeply tied to their understanding of time. Their maps and star charts alike were drawn upon cycles of floods, moons, and seasons. The same precision that guided their astronomers also guided their landkeepers. When they mapped the heavens, they sought signs of destiny. When they mapped the earth, they sought harmony. And in both, they found comfort. For to chart the world was to make it less uncertain. It is remarkable how their ideas endured. Many centuries later, Greek and Roman scholars would study Babylonian records, inheriting not only their knowledge, but their method. The idea that the world could be represented, measured, and understood. The foundations of geography itself were laid here, in those clay tablets, baked by sun and preserved by sand. When one looks upon them today, through the glass of a museum or the lens of a scholar, it is easy to forget their age. Yet they are among the oldest surviving expressions of human thought, tangible proof that our ancestors did not wander blindly through their world. They watched, remembered, and recorded. They sought not just survival, but comprehension. As night falls over the ancient city, the scent of clay and incense mingles in the air. The great ziggurat casts its shadow across the plain. Somewhere, within a chamber lit by oil lamps, a scribe sets down his stylus and inspects his work. The map before him is small, but it holds his world entire. The rivers he has crossed, the stars he has watched, the gods he has served. He exhales softly, and the clay cools. Thousands of years will pass, but his lines will remain, and through them, his world will never be lost. Beyond the deserts of Mesopotamia, another civilization was rising along a river that gave both life and meaning, the Nile. To the ancient Egyptians, the land was not merely where they lived. It was where the divine touched the mortal. Every sunrise, every flood, every grain of sand had purpose. And within this sacred landscape, they too began to draw maps. But their maps did not always guide the living. They guided souls. Egyptian cartography was an art bound to eternity. Their earliest depictions of space were not concerned with trade or conquest, but with the journey that followed death. Two moles became their scrolls. The afterlife, their terrain. To read those maps was to travel through the unseen. A voyage across rivers of judgment, gates of trial, and fields of eternal peace. The Book of the Dead, a name given by later scholars, was their great guide. It was not a single book, but a collection of writings, spells, and illustrations placed beside the dead, often written upon long rolls of papyrus. Each section revealed a passage through the underworld, the Dua, a realm of gods, spirits, and transformations. To the Egyptians, death was not an end, but a journey, and every traveler required directions. When a noble or priest was laid in their tomb, the scribes would prepare these sacred maps with care and devotion. In soft light they painted winding paths across the papyrus, showing where the soul must walk, where dangers waited, and where guardians demanded passwords. The rivers and fields drawn there were no less real to them than the Nile itself. For them, the act of drawing was not imagination, it was guidance. To forget a path was to be lost forever. Each journey began in darkness, in the realm of night. The soul, newly freed from its body, was believed to stand before Osiris, the lord of the afterlife. Before it could reach him, it must travel through 12 gates, each guarded by spirits whose names must be known. The map guided the soul past these perils, showing how to cross the great lake of fire, how to greet the gods of the hours, and how to speak truth when the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma, at the symbol of divine order. To see one of these papyrus scrolls today is to gaze upon both art and devotion. The drawings are delicate flowing lines of blue and gold, soft tones of ochre and green. The gods stand tall, each in their place. Ra, sailing his sunboat through the night. Anubis, weighing the hard. Thoth, recording the verdict. Between them wind the paths of the soul, crossing rivers, gates, and caverns. The hieroglyphs whisper prayers of protection, invoking magic to guard against hunger, serpents, and despair. Yet Beneath all this faith lies something deeply human, a desire to make sense of what cannot be known. The Egyptians, in their wisdom, drew what no one had seen, believing that by mapping the unseen, they could master it. Their maps of the afterlife were acts of hope as much as belief. They reflected a people who could not imagine the world as chaos. There must always be order, even beyond death. Over centuries, these sacred maps evolved. In the tombs of later dynasties, the walls themselves became vast cartographies of eternity. Scenes stretched from floor-to-ceiling rivers of the underworld, stairways to the heavens, and fields of reeds where the blessed walked forever in gentle light. The tomb of Seti, deep beneath the Valley of the Kings, holds some of the finest examples. The ceilings are painted with constellations, the walls with pathways. Even the ceilings served as celestial maps, stars painted in gold upon blue, a reflection of the night sky above the desert. One might wonder, did the Egyptians ever map the world they lived in? Indeed, they did, though few such records survive. Surveyors, known as rope stretchers, measured land for temples and farming. They marked boundaries after each flood, ensuring that fields were fairly divided once the Nile withdrew. These were practical maps, lines upon parchment, guiding the hands of builders and farmers. But their greater fascination remained always with eternity. To chart the living land was necessary. To chart the next world was divine. Imagine, for a moment, one of those ancient scribes. He sits cross-legged upon the floor of a quiet chamber, lit by oil lamps. Beside him lies a strip of papyrus, smooth and pale, still smelling faintly of the marsh where it was cut. His brush dips into a small jar of red pigment. With slow, practiced motions, he begins to draw the winding river of the afterlife. He pauses now and then, reciting from memory the hymns that accompany each section. To him, this is not merely work, it is service, both sacred and eternal. The lines he draws will guide another being through the darkness, and in that duty, there is peace. As centuries pass, the Egyptian maps of the afterlife become not only religious guides, but also historical treasures. They show how deeply humans have always desired orientation, even in mystery. They tell us that to map is not only to locate but to understand. The Egyptians mapped the soul's passage because they believed that every journey, no matter how divine, must have its path. In Teeth's belief, they joined all who would come after them. Even today, scholars marvel at the precision of their cosmic diagrams, the harmony between sky, land, and eternity, their sense of proportion, their alignment with stars, their symmetry of temple and tomb. All were reflections of an ordered universe, and through these, their maps whisper a truth that time cannot erase, that humanity has always sought to bring light to the unknown. When the last lamps are extinguished in the tomb, and centuries of silence follow, the maps remain. Buried beneath sand and stone, they await rediscovery, and when the archaeologist's light falls upon them once more, the world of the dead breathes again. The colors, though faded, still hold grace. The lines still lead the eye, just as they once led the soul, and in that quiet, one feels something eternal. The same wonder that moved the ancient scribe, the same reverence that shaped his hand. For in drawing the path to eternity, he drew the essence of what it means to be human, to seek, to believe, and to find one's way through darkness. As centuries turned and empires rose and fell along the great rivers, a new spirit began to stir across the blue waters of the Aegean. The Greeks, seekers, sailors, and thinkers, looked not only at the lands beneath their feet, but at the heavens above. For them, the world was not a flat field of myth, but a question waiting for reason. They were among the first to ask, what shape does the earth truly hold? Long before telescopes and compasses, before the great maps of the Renaissance, the Greeks began to look outward with a curiosity that would change how humanity understood its place in the cosmos. They inherited knowledge from the Babylonians and Egyptians, fragments of the stars, records of rivers, routes of trade, yet they transformed these old inheritances into something grander. To them, the act of mapping was not just practical, it was philosophical. To draw the earth was to draw the mind of creation itself. In the bustling ports of Miletus, a city of thinkers and merchants, The philosopher Anaximander is said to have drawn one of the first known Greek maps of the world. Imagine it a simple circle, surrounded by the sea, dotted with names like Asia, Europe, and Libya. It was a small reflection of what the Greeks believed to be the oikoumene, the inhabited world. Though primitive by modern eyes, it was revolutionary for its time. For the first time, the world was imagined as a single, ordered space, something that could be understood and drawn. But the Greeks did not stop at drawing. They sought to measure. Among them, one mind rose above others. Eratosthenes of Syria, the librarian of Alexandria, in the warm light of that grand library, surrounded by scrolls and scholars, Eratosthenes did what no one before had truly achieved. He measured the earth. He had heard of a well far to the south, where, on the summer solstice, the sun's light reached straight to the bottom. At the same time, in Alexandria, shadows still fell upon the ground. From that difference in shadow, using only the tools of geometry and reason, he calculated the planet's circumference. His answer was astonishingly close to the truth, a mere whisper away from the modern measurement. Without leaving his homeland, without seeing the earth from the heavens, Eratosthenes had mapped its scale through the quiet power of thought. This was the dawn of scientific cartography, a blending of observation, mathematics, and wonder. The earth, once wrapped in myth, began to take on shape and size. For the Greeks, the divine was not lost in this discovery. It was revealed. To them, reason was sacred, a form of worship through understanding. As Greek sailors ventured farther to the Black Sea, to Egypt, across the Mediterranean, they brought back tales of lands unknown and peoples unseen. These stories found their way into the hands of mapmakers and philosophers alike. The world expanded, piece by piece, not through conquest, but curiosity. And yet, even in this age of reason, myth remained. On many maps, the edges of the world still shimmered with imagination. Monstrous races, seas that boiled, and lands where the sun slept. The Greeks did not erase their myths. They wove them into their maps, binding the known and the mysterious together. To them, wonder was not the opposite of knowledge. It was its companion. Then came Claudius Ptolemy, a man whose influence would echo through more than 1,000 years. Living in the great city of Alexandria during the 2nd century, Ptolemy gathered every fragment of knowledge the Greeks and their neighbors had ever written about the earth and the stars. His monumental work, the Geographia, became one of the most important texts in the history of mapping. In it, he introduced something miraculous, the idea of latitude and longitude. Every place, he proposed, could be fixed upon a grid, its position marked by degrees of distance. It was a bold attempt to bring order to chaos, to capture the infinite variety of Earth upon a single system of lines. Though imperfect, his framework became the language of maps for over a millennium. Imagine a scribe, centuries later in a quiet monastery, copying Ptolemy's coordinates onto parchment by lamplight. With each stroke, the ancient Greek vision would live again. A spark of order, geometry, and wonder passed through generations. The Greeks' relationship with cartography was not one of mere utility. It was a mirror of their philosophy. For them, the world was both physical and ideal, a place to be measured, yet also to be contemplated. Their maps reflected their belief that everything had form, harmony, and reason. Whether tracing the course of the Nile or the arc of the heavens, they sought beauty and structure. A well-made map was not only a guide, it was a portrait of the cosmos. Still, the Greeks understood the limits of knowledge. They knew the world stretched beyond their horizons, beyond the pillars of Hercules, beyond the seas of myth. In their writings, one hears both confidence and humility. Confidence in reason and humility before the vastness of creation. As night fell upon the marble cities of Greece, philosophers would stand upon terraces overlooking the dark sea. The stars above mirrored the world below, each constellation a map of myth and memory. In the soft wind, one might hear the murmur of waves mingling with quiet thoughts, of where the earth ends, of how far the soul might travel, of what lies beyond the known. And so, in their own time, The Greeks did not only chart coastlines or measure shadows, they charted the spirit of inquiry itself. They began a tradition that would pass to Rome, to Byzantium, to the scholars of Islam, and the mapmakers of the Renaissance. Every compass rose, every line of latitude, every globe that spins today, all owes something to that ancient vision born under the blue skies of Hellas. The Greeks taught that to know the world is to honor it, and in their maps, drawn with care and reason, we still glimpse that sacred union of art, curiosity, and faith, the belief that even the vastest mysteries can be touched by the hand of understanding. Long after the voices of ancient Greece had faded, one name still echoed through the halls of learned Ptolemy. His thoughts outlived the marble temples, the philosophers, and even the empires that rose and fell around the Mediterranean. His Geographia, a work of quiet brilliance, would survive not as mere record, but as a light guiding scholars through centuries of darkness. In Alexandria, where he lived and worked, the scent of papyrus and sea mingled in the warm air. The city was a meeting place of worlds Greek, Egyptian, Roman, and within its library, minds from every land gathered to exchange knowledge. There, amid scrolls of astronomy, mathematics, and geography, Ptolemy built a vision that would outlast all borders. He believed that to understand the earth was to understand the heavens, that both followed divine order. Every city, every river, every mountain could be fixed upon an invisible grid, bound by lines of latitude and longitude. These lines, unseen yet eternal, were the framework of harmony itself. To trace them was to trace the structure of creation. He labored over numbers and reports brought by merchants and sailors, assembling fragments of distant lands into a whole. The maps he described were not always perfect, yet they were revolutionary. For the first time, one could imagine the world as a single, measurable space, not an endless mystery, but a design that could be reasoned and drawn. When Ptolemy wrote, the Roman Empire still stood its road stretching from the misty north to the burning sands of Africa. But he was less concerned with the might of Rome than with the geometry of the cosmos. He saw Earth not as a battlefield of empires, but as a body governed by proportion. His maps, drawn long after his death by others who followed his instructions, reflected that same balance, land and sea, arranged like chords in a celestial song. Imagine one of those early Roman scribes, copying Ptolemy's tables by candlelight. The air smells faintly of ink and tallow. Before him lies a parchment, blank, but waiting to receive the world. Line by line, he marks the grid, latitude running from equator to pole, longitude spanning east to west. Then, with measured care, he fills in the shapes of continents. Greece, Italia, Egypt. All take form, as if rising from the mist. What had once been rumor becomes image, and what had once been chaos becomes order. And yet, the Geographia was more than science. It was philosophy rendered in ink, a belief that knowledge brings clarity, and that clarity brings peace. For Ptolemy, to map the earth was to bring light to shadow. He did not see his work as conquest, but as revelation, the mind's quiet triumph over uncertainty. Centuries later, when Rome's glory waned and its cities grew quiet, his words slept too. Scrolls were lost to fire, to flood, to time. But knowledge has its own way of surviving. In monasteries, scholars copied what fragments remained. In distant lands, Arabic translators preserved his ideas with care and reverence. They saw in Ptolemy not merely a Greek thinker, but a universal one, a bridge between worlds. Through their devotion, his maps were reborn. The Islamic Golden Age, a time of profound discovery, breathed life into his coordinates once more. From Baghdad to Cordova, scholars like Al-Khwarizmi expanded upon his ideas, refining his measurements, comparing them with new observations. They charted the stars, drew coastlines, and reimagined the Earth's sphere with remarkable precision. In their hands, Ptolemy's vision became a living flame, carried through time, illuminating the path toward modern geography. The lines he imagined were drawn again upon parchment and star charts, adorned with Arabic script and golden compass roses. His system, born in Alexandria, became the foundation of all future maps, guiding sailors, scholars, and dreamers alike. When Europe awoke once more in the Renaissance, Rediscovering the wisdom of ages past, Ptolemy's Geographia returned with renewed majesty. Copies traveled from Constantinople to Venice, from Florence to Nuremberg. Cartographers like Mercator and Toscanelli studied its pages, building upon its structure even as they added new lands no Greek had ever imagined. From Ptolemy's grid, the great explorers would later set sail. His invisible lines became the framework of navigation, the hidden bones of every chart, the very language of mapping. Latitude, longitude, meridian is his inheritance. Without his geometry, the compass would wander, and the globe itself might have remained an abstraction. And yet, there is something gentle in his legacy, something more than measurement. His maps were not instruments of conquest. They were acts of understanding. They showed that humanity, wherever it lived, shared one earth under one sky. In that quiet truth lies a kind of peace, the peace that comes when the world, no matter how vast, feels connected by reason. If one listens closely, one might still hear his presence in the rhythm of cartography itself. The steady movement from chaos to clarity, from darkness to knowledge. Each modern atlas, no matter how adorned or advanced, is a descendant of his vision, a continuation of that calm pursuit of order. And so, when we speak of Ptolemy, we do not speak only of a man, but of a bridge between ages. He bound together Greece and Rome, faith and logic, imagination and proof. His coordinates became the unseen web that holds our world together, the silent measure behind every journey. When the candle burned low in that ancient Alexandrian chamber, he must have looked once more upon his parchment, the earth divided by lines, yet united in harmony, and known that he had touched something eternal. For though empires crumble and names fade, the desire to understand the world remains, and that, perhaps, is the most human art of all. Where the Greeks sought understanding through reason, the Romans sought mastery through structure. Their empire, vast and disciplined, stretched across mountains, rivers, and seas, from the misty cliffs of Britannia to the burning sands of Arabia. And within this web of conquest and civilization, maps became tools not of wonder, but of order. The Romans did not draw to dream, they drew to rule. For the Romans, the map was the reflection of power. It was said that all roads led to Rome, and so to a deed radiating outward from the capital like veins from a beating heart. Through those roads moved legions, merchants, messages, and dreams. Yet behind the grandeur of their movement was an art, the cartography, that made such reach possible. Their surveyors, known as agrimensors, the land measurers, were the quiet architects of empire. With their rods, chains, and wax tablets, they recorded the earth with astonishing precision. From each conquered province, they marked distances, boundaries, and routes, often engraving their findings into stone or bronze. For them, the world was not mysterious. It was measurable and therefore governable. Imagine one such surveyor at dawn, standing on a Roman road in Gaul. Mist hangs low over the valley. His wax tablet glimmers faintly in the light. With trained eyes, he aligns his instrument, marks a point, and records the distance to the next milestone. Behind him, the road stretches straight as an arrow, miles upon miles of stone laid by countless hands. To the traveler, it is merely a road. To empire, it is a line of control, a boundary made visible. From these measurements came the first great Roman maps, not the speculative diagrams of philosophers, but the practical blueprints of civilization. They charted provinces, cities, and military routes, serving governors, generals, and engineers alike. Roads, rivers, and ports, the arteries of empire, all found their place upon these scrolls, and through them, the emperor could hold the world in his gaze. The most famous of all these relics, the Tabula Peutingeria, survives as a whisper from that age. Though the surviving copy was made centuries later, it preserves a Roman vision of the known world, an astonishing network of roads and settlements, stretching from Britain to India. Unfolded, it runs nearly 7 meters long, a ribbon of empire winding across parchment. Mountains rise in red and green, rivers snake like veins of blue, and at the center, glowing like a sun, stands Roma. It is not a map of geography as we know it, not meant for navigation upon the ground, but rather a diagram of connection. Each road, each city, is drawn to show relationship rather than scale. In this, it captures the very spirit of Rome itself, the belief that the world is held together by roads, order, and law. Where the Greeks drew the earth to understand its shape, the Romans drew it to understand its reach. And yet, beyond this utilitarian purpose, there was still something almost spiritual in their mapping. For the Romans believed that space itself was sacred, that each plot of land must be measured and divided in accordance with divine will. The founding of a city, the building of a road, the border of a province, all were consecrated acts. The groma, the tool used to align roads and boundaries, was set according to the cardinal directions, ensuring that human order reflected the harmony of the cosmos. In this way, even their geometry bore traces of reverence. Within the Forum of Rome, maps of conquest adorned marble walls, vast, gleaming depictions of the empire's expanse. Visitors could gaze upon them and see, in a single glance, the triumph of civilization over wilderness. To look upon those maps was to feel both awe and belonging, to know that one's world had a center, and that center was eternal. But for the common traveler, maps were rare. Most journeyed by memory or by milestone, guided by the unbroken logic of Roman engineering. Every road bore markers, carved stones, noting distances, often counting the miles to Rome itself. Each travella, with a merchant or messenger, moved through a landscape already mapped in the empire's mind. Still, even the Romans could not capture everything. Beyond their frontiers, mystery endured lands of mist and myth, where their maps grew vague and the imagination once again crept in. Upon those distant edges, the old Greek legends lingered, places where the sun was set to rest, where men walked with the heads of dogs, where rivers turned to gold. Even an empire that measured everything could not escape the allure of the unknown. As centuries passed, the Roman cartographers refined their craft. They built upon Greek theories, adapted Ptolemaic coordinates, and merged logic with imperial need. Yet for all their precision, the Roman maps were ultimately maps of dominion, tools of administration, taxation, and war. When the empire finally fell, its roads remained silent and enduring, while its maps faded to dust. But the idea they embodied that a map could hold power never died. In time, those old Roman routes became the veins through which new civilizations would flow. Pilgrims would walk where legions once marched. Monks would travel the same roads, carrying parchment and prayer instead of sword and decree. Beneath their feet lay the invisible memory of empire, the geometry of Rome, still guiding the shape of Europe itself. And so, the Roman cartographers left behind more than maps. They left a vision of a connected world, a vision that would outlast emperors, outlast centuries. Their lines became the framework upon which the modern world was built. Their measurements the language of every city and field that followed. In their steady hands, mapping had ceased to be wonder and become order. Yet in that order a new kind of wonder was born. For though they sought control, they also revealed connection. Every milestone, every measured path, whispered the same truth: that the earth, vast and varied, could still be drawn together by human will. In the heart of a dimly lit chamber, long after the empire's glory had begun to fade, a scribe carefully unrolled a remarkable scroll, not a tale of kings or saints, but a portrait of the world itself. Line by line, symbol by symbol, he traced the memory of Rome's reach. This was the Tabula Peutingeria, the Peutingeria table. A relic unlike any other, a map that dared to hold the vastness of an empire upon a single ribbon of parchment. It was no small parchment, either. When fully unrolled, it stretched nearly 7 meters in length, like an ancient serpent of ink and parchment winding through time. To gaze upon it was to journey without leaving one's seat. From the dark shores of Britannia, through the deserts of Egypt, across the stormy seas to India, all of Rome's known world was laid bare, compressed and stretched into one magnificent design. But this was not a map as we might imagine one today. Its form was strange, almost dreamlike. The world upon it appeared narrow and elongated, more scrolled than globe. Mountains rose in jagged lines of red and green. Rivers flowed like coiling threads of blue. Cities stood as small crowned symbols, glowing with their ancient names: Roma, Antiochia, Alexandria. The table was not meant to show the world's shape, but its roads, the endless network that had bound the empire together. And at the center of it all was Rome radiant, marked in gold the eternal city from which every road was said to begin and end. Even upon parchment, the empire's heart still beat. The Ptolemy table was a wonder of both memory and ambition. The version we know today is believed to be a copy from the 13th century, drawn by medieval monks from a Roman original, perhaps dating back to the 4th or even the 1st century after Christ. The name it bears, Putinger, belongs not to its creator, but to Konrad Pütner, a German humanist and scholar who preserved it during the Renaissance. Yet the soul within it is far older, carrying the vision of Rome across 1,000 years. Each line upon it speaks of distance, order, and dominion. Nearly 4,000 places are marked: cities, ports, way stations, and fortresses. Thin red roads link them like threads in a tapestry, each line measured with Roman precision. Tiny icons denote baths, temples, and post stations, the infrastructure of a world once unified by discipline and ambition. It is less a map for travelers and more a grand ledger of connection, a record of how Rome saw the world through movement and mastery. For the Roman mind, the world was not a globe to be admired, but a space to be crossed, to march, to trade, to communicate. These were the true acts of civilization, and so the Püttinger table did not depict seas in full, nor mountains in their glory. It was a map for travelers of empire, for those who needed to know how long the journey took, not how the horizon looked. Imagine a Roman officer studying this map before a campaign. His finger glides along the red line from Ravenna to Byzantium, counting the stops, estimating the days. He does not marvel at its beauty. He sees efficiency. Yet, centuries later, a monk poring over the same map by candlelight sees something else entirely, a ghost of the past, a faint echo of a world once whole. For him, the Püttinger table was not just a tool. It was scripture written in geography. Even in its strange form, the table tells of Rome's unity and of its longing to make sense of the vastness it commanded. Where the edges of the known world once lay, the table dares to reach further. It shows Persia, India, and lands beyond, places that Rome barely touched but imagined nonetheless. The edges blur between reality and myth, where the old Greek and Roman imaginations still whispered of strange beasts, golden rivers, and lands of endless sun. At its heart, however, the table captures something deeply human: the need to trace the path home. Every road upon it returns, in some way, to Rome. It is a symbol not only of conquest, but of belonging. In this way, it became a reflection of Roman thought itself, that to know the world was to bring it within the order of roads, law, and measurement. In monasteries centuries later, scholars preserved the table not merely as a curiosity, but as a guide to memory. Through it, they glimpsed a civilization that had stretched across continents, a world once mapped with certainty, now reduced to fragile parchment. To them, it was a bridge between the clarity of Rome and the mystery of their own age, and as they copied its symbols with quills and ink, they unknowingly carried Rome's vision into the medieval world. The Püttinger table also carried a certain beauty, austere, geometric, and strangely alive. Its cities, drawn like jeweled towers, seemed to shimmer against the parchment. Its rivers wound gracefully between mountains that rose like folded cloth. Even its distortions told a story. For to fit the entire known world upon a scroll, one had to sacrifice the earth's true shape. Yet what emerged was something poetic. A map that felt less like geography and more like memory itself, stretched thin by time. In its endurance lies its greatest marvel. For over 1,500 years, through empire and darkness, through the fall of Rome and the dawn of Christendom, the Püttinger table survived fragile yet unbroken. It is as though the map refused to forget, and even now, it remains one of the few surviving witnesses to how the ancients truly saw their world. When we look upon it today, we do not just see a map. We see the mind of Rome made visible, its ambition, its control, its faith and order. Every line whispers of empire, yet also of humanity. The desire to chart what lies beyond, to bring chaos into harmony, to leave behind a pattern that outlives the hand that drew it. The Puttinger table stands as both an end and a beginning. The last great map of the ancient world, and the first to guide the medieval one. Through its narrow lanes of ink, Rome's roads still lead onward, even now not across stone, but across memory. The world was changing. Empires had risen and fallen, yet humanity's hunger to understand the earth had not dimmed. By the time dawn broke upon the late medieval and early Renaissance ages, a new kind of curiosity stirred, one that looked beyond the horizons of known lands and into the uncharted blue beyond the sea. This was the dawn of a new era of mapmakers, men and women who stood at the crossroads of old belief and new discovery. The ancient wisdom of Greece and Rome still lingered, copied in fragile manuscripts and guarded in monasteries, yet whispers of new worlds began to drift through Europe's ports. Sailors returned from distant shores with tales of islands unseen by Ptolemy and coasts that defied every known chart. The old maps, once sacred, began to seem small. In the quiet chambers of Venice, Genoa, and Lisbon, cartographers bent over their tables by candlelight. The smell of ink and salt filled the air. Their hands traced coastlines no one had drawn before, some from rumor, some from vision, and some from the cautious notes of seafarers who risked their lives upon the waves. Each line they made carried the weight of both faith and uncertainty. For them, mapmaking was no longer just the act of recording what was known. It was the art of imagining what might be. And yet, this new age did not begin with arrogance. It began with awe. Many of the early mapmakers believed they were tracing the very design of creation itself. The world, in their eyes, was not merely a sphere of land and sea, but a divine masterpiece waiting to be revealed. A vast tapestry woven by God and discovered by human courage. To map it was an act of reverence. Among the most remarkable of these early works was the Mappa Mundi, a medieval vision of the world that combined geography, faith, and legend. The most famous, the Hereford Mappa Mundi of England, depicted the known world in circular form, with Jerusalem gleaming at its center. Around it, continents unfolded like petals, Asia above, Europe to the left, Africa to the right. But within these lands, truth and myth lived side by side. The Garden of Eden rested at the map's top, near the source of the 4 rivers. Strange creatures, dog-headed men, one-footed giants and lands of perpetual shadow, filled the far corners. To modern eyes, such maps might seem fanciful, but in their time, they were windows to wonder. For medieval minds, the world was not divided between science and story. It was one grand narrative, where divine mystery and earthly discovery intertwined. Every map was both guide and gospel, a reflection of how people understood their place in creation. But slowly, quietly, the balance began to shift. Mariners like the Portuguese explorers started to bring home precise records, distances measured by stars, coastlines sketched by hand. In the workshops of Florence and Majorca, these reports met the artistry of the cartographers. The result was something entirely new. Maps that could guide ships beyond sight of land and return them safely home. The Catalan Atlas, created in the 14th century by Abraham Cresques and his son Jehuda, stands as one of the first great bridges between the medieval and the modern. On its vellum pages, one can see both faith and reason. Sharing space, mythical beasts still roam the deserts, yet the compass rose points true, and distances are carefully marked. The winds are drawn as faces in the clouds, exhaling upon the seas, while kings sit proudly upon their painted thrones. It was not just a map of places, it was a portrait of a world in transition. In those same years, new tools began to transform the art of navigation. The magnetic compass, long known in China, found its way into European hands. The astrolabe refined by Arab scholars allowed sailors to measure their latitude by the stars. And from the great libraries of the Islamic world came translations of Ptolemy's geography, rediscovered after centuries lost. Once again, his grid of latitude and longitude reawakened, this time guiding ships instead of scholars. The air itself seemed filled with promise. The world was opening not only in distance, but in imagination. To the east, the trade routes of the Silk Road whispered of riches and lands of gold. To the west, rumors grew of islands across the endless sea. The maps began to show blank spaces, no longer as warnings but as invitations. Upon those pale, empty stretches, cartographers sometimes wrote a simple phrase, Hic sunt dracones, here be dragons. Yet behind those words lay something far more powerful. Curiosity. As ships began to sail beyond the familiar, cartographers faced an impossible challenge. Their craft demanded precision, but the reports they received were often conflicting. One sailor spoke of a coastline that stretched north, another swore it curved east. A storm could erase an entire record, and yet they drew steadily, carefully. Line upon line. For them, every error was a step toward truth. One can almost imagine them late at night, a flickering lamp, a cold draft from the window, and the faint scratching of a quill. They pause, dip their pen in ink, and trace a shore few have seen, knowing that somewhere, across that ink-dark ocean, another soul might follow it home. The mapmaker's dawn was not only the beginning of a new world, it was the rebirth of wonder. From parchment to compass, from myth to measurement, humanity had begun to lift the veil that separated the known from the unknown. Yet in doing so, something deeper stirred. A realization that the act of mapping was, in itself, a mirror of the soul's desire to find meaning in the vastness. By the 15th century, this light would blaze into the age of discovery, when ships bearing names like Santa Maria and Endeavour would sail into history. But before them came these quiet figures, the mapmakers whose patient craft turned rumor into record, dream into direction. Their work was not the conquest of the earth, but its unveiling. And in their lines of ink, stretching like veins across parchment, we can still feel the pulse of that awakening. The moment when humankind dared to redraw the edges of its world. In the quiet before dawn, when the sea lies still and the stars shimmer like scattered jewels, a sailor stands upon the deck of a ship, his eyes fixed not on the horizon, but upon the heavens. Above him lies his truest map, one that no empire could conquer nor time erase. This was the night sky, the oldest guide humanity has ever known. Long before compasses and clocks, before inked parchment and bronze instruments, it was the stars that led humankind across the vastness of the world. The constellations, glittering in the dark expanse, spoke to every culture in their own tongue, a celestial script shared by shepherds and scholars, merchants and kings alike. The earliest mapmakers, long forgotten, did not begin with earth. They began with the sky. The Babylonians, over to millennia before Christ, kept records of the heavens carved upon clay tablets. Their astronomers charted the rising and setting of stars, the movement of planets, and the cycles of the moon. To them, the heavens were a living calendar, a divine clockwork through which the will of the gods could be read. As centuries passed, the Greeks refined these observations into geometry. Hipparchus and Ptolemy mapped the heavens with mathematical precision, assigning coordinates to stars just as cartographers would later assign them to lands. The heavens and the earth, they believed, mirrored one another, an idea that would guide both astronomers and mapmakers for centuries to come. And then came the sailors, those wandering inheritors of ancient knowledge. They carried the heavens upon their journeys, learning to read the stars not for prophecy, but for direction. Under the endless vault of night, the sea offered no roads, no markers, no borders, only the steadfast constellations. In the northern hemisphere, one star stood still, Polaris, the North Star, unblinking, constant, a silent guardian to all who traveled by night. To the mariners of Greece, Rome, and later, the medieval world, it became the axis of their journeys. They measured their position by its height above the horizon, and in that humble calculation lay their survival. As navigation grew more daring, the tools grew more refined. Terrastrolabe, perfected by Arab scholars, allowed sailors to measure the altitude of a star and thus find their latitude. Its circular brass frame, etched with intricate markings, was both beautiful and practical. When held against the stars, it became a bridge between heaven and earth, translating the language of the cosmos into human understanding. In monasteries and observatories alike, scholars began to copy the celestial charts that guided these voyages. One can imagine a monk in the silence of a stone scriptorium, drawing tiny stars with a quill dipped in ink, naming them in Latin, Arabic, or Greek. Each name carried the echo of ancient tongues: Altair, Sirius, Arcturus. To speak them aloud was to whisper poetry older than language itself. Yet not all stars told the same story. In the southern seas, where European mariners had never before sailed, the familiar constellations vanished below the horizon. There, new stars appeared strange patterns unknown to northern eyes. When Portuguese navigators ventured down the coast of Africa, they saw for the first time the Southern Cross gleaming in the black expanse. It became the emblem of the southern world, a new celestial compass guiding explorers into lands unmarked on any Roman parchment. But even as the heavens guided the voyagers, they also inspired the mapmakers who remained on land. The cosmographers, those who sought to map both earth and sky, began to see the two realms as one great system. The position of the stars dictated not only navigation, but the very arrangement of continents. To them, the world was a divine sphere, perfectly ordered, where the motion of the heavens reflected the motion of man. In Florence, in Venice, and in Toledo, artisans began to craft celestial globes, shining spheres of bronze and silver, upon which constellations were etched in delicate lines. These were not maps for travel, but objects of reverence, symbols of humanity's growing mastery over both the seen and the unseen. When candlelight touched their polished surfaces, the constellations glowed like captured fragments of the night. Yet beneath this wonder lingered humility. Even the boldest navigator knew that to follow the stars was to surrender to forces beyond comprehension. The sea was vast, the sky infinite, and the human mind, for all its genius, still small. Each journey was a conversation with mystery itself, a dialogue between courage and faith. In this balance of knowledge and awe, the art of mapping reached new heights. The chartmakers of the 15th century no longer copied the world from memory. They built it from measurement. They used the heavens to define the very shape of the earth, calculating distances by the arc of the sun and the angle of the stars. And though their instruments were simple, their vision was profound. They no longer saw themselves merely as servants of empire, but as participants in creation's unfolding. When we look back upon this age, we see more than history. We see humanity awakening to its place in the cosmos. For every chart drawn, every star named was an act of wonder, a declaration that the world could be known, that the heavens themselves could serve as guideposts in the endless night. The ship creaks softly. The sound of waves deepens, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And so, under the watchful eyes of the stars, the sailors continued onward, their maps incomplete, their hearts full. They carried within them the faith of their ancestors and the tools of a new world, blending ancient mystery with modern skill. And as they followed those distant fires across the heavens, they were not merely finding their way. They were illuminating the path for all who would follow. Faint hum of wind fades. The stars seemed to drift away like glowing embers in darkness. The heavens had been charted, not conquered, but understood. And through that understanding, humankind learned not just where they were, but who they were. Wanderers beneath a boundless sky, guided always by the quiet constancy of light. After centuries of darkness and uncertainty, the long-slumbering knowledge of the ancients began to stir. In the cities of Europe, Florence, Venice, Nuremberg, Lisbon, a quiet revolution was unfolding, one not of swords or kings, but of ink and imagination. This was the Renaissance, the rebirth of thought, and with it came the rebirth of cartography, the art of mapping the world anew. The manuscripts of Ptolemy, once lost to dust in time, had through the tireless work of Arab scholars and translators, his geographia found its way back into the hands of curious minds. When it was finally printed in Latin in the 15th century, it was as though a lamp had been lit in a room long darkened. The old grids of latitude and longitude, the mathematical vision of a round world, all returned, and with them came possibility. In the workshops of Florence, men bent over parchment, measuring with compass and ruler. Ink flowed like lifeblood across vellum, tracing coasts, mountains, and rivers that seemed to re-emerge from the mists of myth. But now, for the first time in centuries, these maps were not mere echoes of faith or fable. They were instruments of discovery. Every line drawn was a statement of belief in human understanding. The printing press, that miracle of the modern age, transformed this ancient art. What had once taken months to copy by hand could now be multiplied and shared across continents. Maps were no longer guarded treasures of monasteries or noble courts. They became the property of sailors, merchants, and dreamers. A navigator in Lisbon could study the same world that a scholar in Florence did. The earth itself seemed to shrink under the weight of ink and knowledge. And yet, even in this new precision, the spirit of artistry remained. Renaissance maps were not sterile documents. They were works of beauty and devotion. Seas were filled with ships and sea monsters, their sails unfurled, their jaws open in mythic ferocity. The winds were personified as faces blowing softly across the margins. Compass roses blossomed in the corners like flowers of direction. Each map was both a tool and a painting, a dialogue between science and imagination. Among the great masters of this craft stood names that would echo through the ages. Claudius Ptolemy, reborn through translation, inspired new generations. Fra Mauro, a Venetian monk, created one of the most extraordinary world maps of the 15th century, a circular marvel of ink and illumination, rich with notes and illustrations. His world turned south at the top, following medieval convention, yet it brimmed with the knowledge of new trade routes and distant lands. He blended scripture and science with such grace that even centuries later, one can feel both reverence and reason upon his parchment. Soon after came the age of true expansion. The voyages of Prince Henry's sailors along the African coast, of Columbus across the Atlantic, of Vasco da Gama around the Cape of Good Hope. All these journeys shattered the limits of the known world. The mapmakers could no longer rely on ancient authorities alone. They had to listen to the sea itself. Each expedition returned with sketches, coordinates, and tailies that challenged the old visions. Suddenly, the earth was far larger, far stranger than anyone had dared imagine. The outlines of continents swelled and shifted. New islands appeared, some real, others imagined in the excitement of discovery. For every accurate chart, there were a dozen dreams drawn in ink. In this chaotic expansion of the world, the cartographer's task became both more difficult and more divine. To bring order from such vastness required not only skill, but faith. Faith in geometry, in testimony, in the power of observation, and perhaps above all, faith that the earth could indeed be understood. Ceratus Mercator, the Flemish genius of the 16th century, embodied this new spirit. His name would become legend. His projection, a method of drawing the round world upon a flat surface, the standard of navigation for centuries to come. Mercator's world was one of balance and proportion, where mathematics gave form to mystery. He called his maps cosmographies, not mere depictions of land, but representations of the entire order of creation. To him, the map was not a picture, but a philosophy. And yet, even as he worked with ruler and compass, Mercator never forgot the wonder within his craft. In his letters, he spoke of the earth as the mirror of God's creation, and of maps as the footprints of his wisdom. It was this union of reason and reverence that defined the Renaissance cartographer. They were not merely craftsmen of ink and paper. They were interpreters of a divine geometry. The influence of art itself seeped deeply into their work. The same Florence that gave birth to Leonardo and Michelangelo gave equal breadth to the mapmaker. The golden ratios that defined paintings and cathedrals also guided coastlines and compass roses. The precision of mathematics danced with the flourish of imagination. In that union, the cartographer's workshop became a temple, and the map its illuminated manuscript. As the 16th century dawned, the world on paper began to resemble the world in truth. The Americas stretched boldly across the western edge of the parchment. Africa's contours grew firm and familiar. Asia, though still half myth, gleamed with detail. The dream of total understanding of mapping the whole of creation seemed almost within reach, and yet, with every completed chart, came a humbling realization. The world was infinite in its complexity. Each new map revealed not mastery, but mystery. For every coast discovered, there remained another shrouded in mist. The more the map makers revealed, the more they saw how much still lay hidden. The Renaissance had given the world back its vision, a vision drawn in ink, measured in stars, and blessed by imagination. The cartographers of that age did more than record geography. They rekindled humanity's oldest desire, to make sense of the vastness that surrounds us, to trace our place upon the endless page of creation. And so, as the candles burned low in their workshops and the quills came to rest, those patient craftsmen left behind not just maps, but mirrors, reflections of a world rediscovered, reborn, and still unfolding. There comes a moment in every age when the tools we make begin to shape the way we think. For the people of the Renaissance and beyond, that tool was the map. What had begun as a way to find roads, ports, and trade routes had become something deeper, a reflection of how the human mind itself understood the world. The map, once a servant to explorers, became a philosopher's mirror. It taught humanity not only where they stood, but how they thought. It invited order into chaos, giving the vastness of Earth a structure, a logic. To gaze upon a map was to believe, for a moment, that the boundless could be contained, that even mystery could be measured. In those quiet workshops of Europe, the cartographer's art had become the language of understanding. Each coastline drawn was not merely a shape, but an idea, that the world could be observed, studied, and known. Each compass line was a declaration of faith in human reason. And yet, beneath that geometry, there remained a pulse of wonder, an unspoken knowledge that behind every border lay another question, another story. By the 16th and 17th centuries, maps had escaped the scholar's table and entered the homes of merchants, noblemen, and travelers. They hung upon the walls of studies and great halls, not only as instruments of geography, but as symbols of mastery. To possess a map was to possess knowledge, and to possess knowledge was to hold power. In these grand rooms, filled with books, globes, and light from leaded windows, one could see men and women standing before maps as though before an altar. Their fingers would trace the coasts of Africa or the islands of the Indies, dreaming of what lay beyond. Maps became a kind of silent promise that there was always something more to discover if one dared to follow the lines. Yet not all maps sought to command. Some sought to understand. As the Enlightenment dawned, the map became a tool not only for exploration but for thought. Philosophers and scientists began to see parallels between geography and the mind, both landscapes to be charted, both realms of mystery. To understand the world, to believe it, was to map its patterns. To understand oneself, perhaps, was to do the same. Even art began to borrow the language of cartography. Poets spoke of mapping the soul, and painters rendered their worlds with the precision of explorers. The grid, once a technical device of latitude and longitude, became a symbol of vision itself, a way to impose harmony upon the unknown. But there was another transformation as well, one quieter, almost spiritual. The more maps revealed, the more humanity understood that no map could ever be complete. For every continent drawn, there were depths of ocean still unseen. For every nation bordered, there were inner worlds yet uncharted. In this realization, humility returned. The map, in all its precision, reminded humankind of its limits. It whispered that understanding was endless, that knowledge was not possession, but pursuit. The Renaissance mapmakers had lit the torch of discovery. The thinkers who followed saw in that light both clarity and shadow. Some philosophers of the 17th century wrote that the mind itself was like a world, an internal geography of memory, dream, and thought. And indeed, to study a map was to experience something of that. To travel without moving, to journey through lines and colors into spaces one could not physically touch. Imagine, for a moment, a scholar seated before an open atlas. The candles flicker. His eyes move from one page to another, from the Arctic's white silence to the golden deserts of Africa. In his mind, he is already there, hearing the crunch of snow beneath his boots, feeling the dry wind of the Sahara. The map becomes a bridge between body and imagination, between the seen and the unseen. In that sense, the map and the mind share a single purpose: to give shape to wonder. And so, cartography evolved once more, not merely as science, but as expression. Each mapmaker became, in his own way, a storyteller. The rivers, the mountains, the coasts, all were characters in a silent narrative of discovery. To draw them was to tell a story of curiosity, courage, and connection. Even now, when we gaze upon those ancient maps with their curling seas and sunlit compass roses, something within us stirs. We feel not the distance of time, but the intimacy of recognition. The same impulse that moved a hand of a Babylonian scribe or a Venetian monk still moves within us today. The desire to understand our place in the vastness. The soft turning of the globe continues. The hum of the room grows still. The map and the mind, reflections of each other, bound by imagination. One charts the outer world, the other the inner. Both are driven by the same quiet fire, the need to bring the unknown into light. And so, through every age, every parchment, and every star drawn in ink, humanity has continued its greatest mapping of all: the endless journey toward understanding itself. The map is not the world, but it is the dream of the world, and in that dream we find both direction and peace. There comes a moment, after all the stories of discovery have been told, when we must close the atlas and simply breathe. The journey across ages, through parchment and ink, from caves to kingdoms, from stars to seas, it all returns to one quiet truth. The map was never only about the world. It was always about us. From the first hunter tracing rivers in the dirt to find his way home, to the Renaissance scholar painting the heavens in gold leaf, each mapmaker reached for something beyond direction. Each sought a form of peace, a way to make sense of the vast, unpredictable earth beneath their feet. In that effort, they mirrored the human soul itself, curious, searching, and endlessly trying to understand its place in the great design. The oldest maps we know are faint scratches on bone, marks on rock, the work of hands long vanished, yet they remain. Through storms, wars, and centuries, they endure, because they speak to something timeless. They tell us that long before we built ships or cities, we dreamed of knowing where we were, and who we were. As the candle burns lower, imagine the map before you, its coastlines curling like whispers, its mountains rising in gentle inked lines, its compass pointing not north, but inward. Every river drawn is a memory of someone's hope. Every border, a trace of someone's story. The map, in its truest form, was never meant to command or divide. It was meant to connect. To draw lines, yes, but also to remind us that all lines lead, eventually, to one horizon. Whether drawn on clay in Babylon, painted in Egypt, or printed in a Venetian workshop, each map was a quiet prayer, that we might find our way safely through the unknown. And so humanity did, guided not only by stars and symbols, but by imagination. The world those ancient mapmakers could only guess at has now been charted in detail beyond their dreams. Yet even now, as satellites trace every mountain and ocean, the mystery remains. The more we know, the more we realize that knowledge has no edge. The horizon only moves farther away, and the map, the true map, continues to unfold. In a way, we are all map makers still. We draw the lines of our lives. We mark the paths of our choices. We chart the continents of memory and dream. We trace our own constellations, not in the sky, but in the stories we tell, the histories we keep, and the hopes we hold. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy of ancient cartography. Not the parchment or the compass, but the quiet courage to wonder. The mapmakers of old taught us that the unknown is not to be feared, but to be their own, slowly, thoughtfully, beautifully. The sound of a soft breeze stirs the parchment. Now, the candle fades to a glow. The map lies still, its lines bathed in amber light. Outside, the stars shimmer. The same stars the ancients once traced to find their way home. And maybe that is where all maps end, after all, in homecoming. Not to a place, but to a feeling. The peace of knowing we are part of something vast, something ancient, something endlessly unfolding. So rest now, traveler. The journey has been long and gentle. The lines have been drawn, the seas crossed, the mountains mapped. The world has taken shape before your eyes, and yet it remains a mystery, quiet, infinite, and waiting. Close your eyes. Let the map fade into the darkness, and know that somewhere, far across the ages, another hand once did the same, laying down the quill, whispering to the stars, and trusting that tomorrow the map would continue. The final flicker of the candle fades. The room grows still. Only the faint sound of a heartbeat remains steady, rhythmic, eternal. For the world, like the mind, cannot be contained upon paper, but to try to draw it, to dream it, is what makes us human. The map ends where sleep begins. And tonight, dear listener, may you find your way there. And so, dear traveler, our journey through the ancient art of cartography comes to a quiet close. From the first markings on cave walls to the golden maps of the Renaissance, we have followed humanity's hand, tracing wonder, discovery, and the timeless wish to understand the world. If you've joined us for the first time tonight, welcome and thank you. If you've been with us before, thank you for returning, for walking once more through the corridors of history with calm and curiosity. Before you drift away, we kindly ask if you found peace or wonder in tonight's story. Please consider subscribing to Go to Sleep Historian and leave a gentle word in the comments. Your support helps these stories continue to find those who need rest, warmth, and a soft place to dream. And now, the story ends, but the night continues. Ahead lies one full hour of calm, soothing music crafted to help you drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Let the melodies carry you beyond the map's edge, where imagination rests and dreams begin. Good night, traveler. Sleep peacefully, and may your dreams be mapped with stars.